morning sun filtered through the large windows of the studio building, casting long shadows across the polished floors. It was just past 5 a.m., and most of the cast and crew were yet to arrive for the day's filming. The famous actor had developed a habit of arriving early, preferring the quiet moments before the chaos of production began. He parked his motorcycle in his usual spot, nodding to the security guard who had grown accustomed to his early arrivals. Unlike many celebrities of his caliber, he drove himself to work most days, valuing the freedom and normalcy it provided. Despite his fame and fortune, he remained remarkably grounded, a rare quality in Hollywood. "Morning, Tom," the actor said, his voice still rough from sleep. "Morning, sir," Tom replied with a smile. "Another early start?" "You know me. Can't sleep past dawn these days." The security guard chuckled. "The coffee machine in the break room is already on. Made sure of it when I saw your bike pull up. You're a lifesaver," the actor said, genuinely grateful for the small kindness. As he made his way through the quiet building, he relished the peaceful atmosphere. These early mornings were precious to him, a chance to prepare mentally for the demanding scenes ahead without the distractions of a full set. The upcoming action sequence would require intense focus, and he preferred to rehearse his movements alone first. After grabbing a cup of coffee from the break room, he decided to use the restroom before heading to his trailer. He pushed open the door to the men's room nearest to the main stage and paused when he heard a soft, rhythmic sound. Someone was snoring. Curious, he moved quietly further into the restroom. In the last stall, with the door partially open, he could see a man in a gray uniform slumped on the closed toilet seat fast asleep. It was one of the night janitors, an older man with weathered hands and salt and pepper hair. The cleaning cart was parked just outside the stall. The actor stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. The janitor's face looked exhausted even in sleep, with dark circles under his eyes and deep lines etched across his forehead. A small photo was taped to the inside of the cleaning cart, a picture of the man with a young woman in a graduation gown, both beaming with pride. He recognized the janitor now. His name was Robert, and he'd been working at the studio for over 20 years. They'd exchanged pleasantries a few times, but the actor realized he knew very little about the man who cleaned the building while most people were asleep. The actor quietly backed out of the restroom, careful not to wake Robert. Something about the scene had touched him, the exhausted man taking what was probably a much-needed rest during his night shift. As he walked toward his trailer, his mind kept returning to the image of Robert sleeping and the photo of what must be his daughter graduating. In his trailer, he found himself unable to focus on his script. Instead, he picked up his phone and made a call to his longtime assistant. "Hey, it's me. Sorry to call so early." "No problem," his assistant replied, used to his unconventional hours. "Everything okay?" Yeah. I just need you to find out something for me. There's a janitor here named Robert. Older guy, works the night shift. Can you find out a bit about him? How long he's been here, family situation, that kind of thing. But discreetly, okay?" "Of course." "Any particular reason?" The actor hesitated. "Just curious. I'll explain later." Within an hour, as more people began arriving at the studio, his assistant called back with information. Robert had indeed been working at the studio for 23 years. He was a widower with 2 daughters. The older one had graduated from college 2 years ago, the first in their family to do so, and the younger was currently in her 2nd year of nursing school. Robert was working double shifts at the studio and another part-time job on weekends to help pay for his daughter's education. The actor thanked his assistant and hung up, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Here was a man who had been quietly working in the same building for over 2 decades, crossing paths with celebrities and executives, yet remaining largely invisible to them. Robert had probably cleaned the actor's trailer hundreds of times over the years, picking up after him without complaint or recognition. Later that morning, during a break in filming, the actor found himself walking back to the restroom where he'd seen Robert. The janitor was gone now, his shift having ended at 6 a.m. The actor stood there for a moment, thinking about the different lives that intersected in this building, the famous and the unknown, the celebrated and the overlooked. He made another call to his assistant. "I need you to set up a meeting with HR and the head of facilities, this afternoon if possible." "Is everything all right?" his assistant asked, concern evident in her voice. "Everything's fine. I just want to discuss something important. The meeting was arranged for 4 p.m. after the day's shooting was complete. The actor rarely requested meetings with administrative departments, so his request raised some eyebrows, but no one would deny him. In the meeting room, the HR director and facilities manager waited nervously, wondering what issue had prompted this unusual gathering. When the actor arrived, he declined the offered water and got straight to the point. "I want to talk about the night cleaning staff," he began, surprising the executives. "Specifically, I'm concerned about their working conditions." The facilities manager shifted uncomfortably. "Has there been a problem with the cleaning services?" "No, not at all. But this morning I found one of your janitors, Robert, asleep in the restroom. And before you think about disciplining him, that's not why I'm here." The actor leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Robert has been here for over 20 years. He's working double shifts to put his daughters through college. And from what I can tell, he's not the only one on your maintenance staff working themselves to exhaustion." The HR director cleared her throat. "We value all our employees, of course, but you pay them barely above minimum wage," the actor interrupted gently. "For people who have been loyal to this studio for decades." A silence fell over the room. The executives exchanged uncomfortable glances. "What exactly are you suggesting?" the facilities manager finally asked. The actor took a deep breath. "I'm suggesting that we need to do better. These people are the backbone of this studio, working through the night so we can come in to clean stages and restrooms every morning. They deserve better pay, better benefits, and more recognition for their dedication." He pulled out some notes he'd made during lunch break. "I've done some research. The studio's profits last quarter were the highest in 5 years. The executives got bonuses. The stars, myself included, get paid millions. Meanwhile, the cleaning staff hasn't seen a significant raise in almost a decade, according to what I've found." The HR director looked defensive. "With all due respect, the budget for maintenance staff is carefully calculated based on industry standards." "Then the industry standards need to change," the actor replied firmly. "And we can start here." What happened next would change numerous lives at the studio, though no one in the room could have predicted the far-reaching effects of this conversation. The actor wasn't just making a momentary plea based on emotional impulse. He had come prepared with specific requests and suggestions, having spent his lunch break researching labor standards and living wages. As the meeting continued, the initial defensiveness of the executive slowly gave way to genuine engagement with the issues at hand. The actor's sincerity and respect, coupled with his undeniable influence at the studio, created an opening for a conversation that was long overdue. By the time they left the conference room, the first steps of a plan were taking shape, one that would not only address the immediate concerns about the maintenance staff's working conditions, but potentially transform how the studio valued all its behind-the-scenes workers. That evening, as the actor rode his motorcycle home through the darkening city streets, he thought about Robert and wondered if the janitor had any idea that his exhausted nap had sparked what might become a significant change. The thought brought a smile to his face as he accelerated toward home, the weight of the day's emotional discoveries balanced by the possibility of making a real difference. What he didn't know then was that this was just the beginning. The ripple effects of his actions that day would continue to spread, touching lives in ways he couldn't imagine, including his own. 2 weeks had passed since the actor's meeting with HR and the facilities manager. The initial momentum seemed to have stalled, with only vague promises of looking into the matter and reviewing the budget. The actor was beginning to wonder if his concerns had been politely acknowledged only to be quietly shelved. And this particular morning, he arrived at the studio even earlier than usual, hoping to catch Robert before the end of his shift. He had been thinking about the janitor often, feeling a strange connection to someone he barely knew. As he walked through the quiet hallways, the sound of a vacuum cleaner led him to a side corridor, where he found Robert cleaning the carpet. The janitor looked up, surprise crossing his tired face when he recognized the actor. "Good morning, sir," Robert said, quickly turning off the vacuum. "Sorry about the noise." "No, please don't stop on my account," the actor replied. "I'm actually glad I found you. I wanted to talk to you for a minute, if that's okay." Robert looked uncertain, as if trying to figure out what a famous actor could possibly want with him. "Of course, sir. Is there something wrong with the cleaning in your trailer?" The actor shook his head. "No, nothing like that. And please call me David." He extended his hand, which Robert hesitantly shook. "You're Robert, right?" "Yes, sir, I mean David." Robert seemed flustered that the actor knew his name. "I noticed you've been with the studio for a long time. Over 20 years?" Robert nodded, pride briefly replacing his confusion. 23 years next month. That's incredible. Longer than most of the executives, David said with a genuine smile. "I was wondering if you might have time to grab a coffee before your shift ends. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Robert glanced at his watch. "I still have the second-floor bathrooms to finish before 6. "I could help," David offered, surprising both himself and Robert. "4 hands are faster than 2, right?" Robert's mouth fell open slightly. "You want to help me clean bathrooms?"
Why not?
"I'm here early with nothing to do anyway." What followed was perhaps one of the more surreal 30 minutes of Robert's long career at the studio. The famous actor, whose face appeared on billboards across the city, donned a pair of rubber gloves and helped scrub toilets and sinks in the second-floor men's room. At first, Robert kept insisting it wasn't necessary. But David's easygoing attitude and genuine interest in learning the proper way to clean a bathroom eventually put him at ease. As they worked, David asked Robert about his daughters, and the janitor's face lit up with pride as he talked about Lisa, who had graduated with honors in education, and Tina, who was working toward her nursing degree. "Lisa teaches 4th grade now," Robert said as he expertly polished a mirror. "First person in our family to go to college, and now she's shaping young minds. And Tina, she's always been so good with people, going to make an amazing nurse." "You must be incredibly proud," David said, noticing how Robert stood a little straighter when talking about his children. "They're everything to me," Robert replied simply. "After my wife passed, I promised her I'd make sure the girls got every opportunity we never had." By the time they finished, it was just past 6 a.m. and Robert's shift was officially over. "Now about that coffee?" David suggested. They sat in the empty studio cafeteria, which wouldn't officially open for another hour. David had convinced the early kitchen staff to start the coffee machines a bit early, using his charm and the promise of an autograph for the cook's daughter. Over steaming cups, David finally explained his interest in Robert. He told him about finding him asleep that morning 2 weeks ago and his subsequent meeting with management. "I'm sorry about falling asleep," Robert said, looking mortified. "It won't happen again. I was just so tired that day after covering for Pete, who was out sick, and then going straight to my weekend job." "You have nothing to apologize for," David interrupted gently. "That's exactly my point. You shouldn't have to work yourself to exhaustion just to make ends meet, especially not after 23 years of dedication to this place." Robert looked down at his coffee. "It's just how things are. At least I have steady work, which is more than some can say. But it doesn't have to be that way," David insisted. "I've been thinking about this a lot and I want to do something about it. But I need your help." "My help?" Robert looked genuinely confused. "What could I possibly do?" "I need to understand more about the real working conditions of the maintenance staff. Not what management thinks, but what you all actually experience. Would you be willing to talk to some of your colleagues, see if they'd meet with me?" Robert hesitated. "People might be afraid of causing trouble, losing their jobs." "I understand. And I promise no one would be identified without their permission. I just need to gather more information if I'm going to push for real changes." By the time they parted ways, Robert had cautiously agreed to speak with a few trusted co-workers. David gave him his personal phone number, something he rarely did, and asked him to call once he had news. That afternoon, during a break in filming, David received a text from his agent about a major role in an upcoming blockbuster. Normally, such news would have been the highlight of his day, but he found his thoughts continually drifting back to his conversation with Robert. The contrast was stark. Here he was, being offered millions for a few months' work, while Robert had cleaned the same toilets for decades at barely enough to support his family. The inequity of it all struck him with newfound clarity. 3 days later, his phone rang with an unknown number. It was Robert. "I've talked to some people," the janitor said, his voice low as if afraid of being overheard. "A few of them are willing to meet. But they're scared, David, really scared. I understand. Tell them it will be completely confidential." They arranged to meet at a small diner far from the studio on Sunday morning. When David arrived wearing a baseball cap and sunglasses in a modest attempt at disguise, he found Robert sitting in a corner booth with 4 other people, 2 men and 2 women, all with the weathered look of people who worked hard for every dollar they earned. Robert made the introductions. Louis, who had been at the studio almost as long as Robert. Grace, a single mother who cleaned the executive offices. Hector, who maintained the outdoor lots. And Patricia, who worked in set cleaning and had been injured on the job last year without receiving proper compensation. At first, they were hesitant to speak freely, eyeing David with a mixture of suspicion and hope. But as he listened respectfully and asked thoughtful questions, they gradually opened up. The stories they shared painted a troubling picture. Irregular hours, inadequate safety equipment, denied time-off requests, and pay rates that had barely increased in years despite the rising cost of living. "Last month, my apartment rent went up again," Grace said quietly. "I had to take a second job on weekends just to cover it. I barely see my kids now." "I slipped on a wet floor last year," Patricia added, showing David a scar on her arm. "Needed 12 stitches. The studio covered the immediate medical costs, but when I needed physical therapy later, they said it wasn't related. I still can't fully straighten my arm, which makes work even harder." As the conversation continued, David took notes and asked permission to record parts of their discussion. By the end of the 2-hour meeting, he had pages of detailed accounts and a growing sense of determination. "Thank you all for trusting me with your stories," he said as they prepared to leave. "I promise I'm going to do everything I can to help improve things, but I need a little time to figure out the best approach." As they said their goodbyes in the parking lot, Louis, the oldest of the group, pulled David aside. "You know," the elderly janitor said, his voice rough with age, "we've had big shots make promises before. Producers, directors, even an executive once. They all forgot about us as soon as they walked away." David met his gaze steadily. "I'm not going to forget, Louis. You have my word." Back in his car, David sat for a long moment, processing everything he'd heard. The studio had cultivated a public image of progressiveness and employee care, but the reality for its lowest-paid workers told a different story. The disconnection between image and truth bothered him deeply. He made a call to his longtime friend, a respected investigative journalist. "Alex, it's me. I need your advice on something. How would you go about exposing unfair labor practices at a major studio without immediately burning all bridges?" The answer he received wasn't what he expected, but it planted the seed for what would become a far more impactful approach than he had initially imagined. As he drove home, a plan began to take shape, one that would require courage, strategy, and the kind of influence that came with his position. What he didn't realize yet was that the studio executives were already beginning to hear whispers about his meetings with the maintenance staff. By the time he arrived on set the next morning, the comfortable bubble he had occupied, as one of the studio's most valuable stars, was about to be tested in ways he never anticipated. David arrived at the studio the next morning to find an unexpected message waiting for him. The studio's executive director wanted to meet with him privately before filming began. The terse tone of the request suggested this wasn't a casual check-in. His suspicions were confirmed the moment he walked into the expansive corner office. The executive director, Charlotte Wilson, sat behind her massive desk with the head of public relations beside her. Their expressions were carefully neutral, but David could sense the tension in the room. "Thank you for coming on such short notice," Charlotte said, gesturing to the chair across from her. "We wanted to have a quick chat about some concerns that have been brought to our attention." David took a seat, maintaining an equally neutral expression. "What kind of concerns?" Charlotte exchanged a glance with the PR director before continuing. "It's come to our attention that you've been having meetings with maintenance staff. Off-site meetings. So they knew." David wasn't entirely surprised. Studios had ways of keeping tabs on their valuable assets, but he hadn't expected them to move this quickly. "I didn't realize my personal time was being monitored," he replied evenly. Charlotte leaned forward. "David, you know we respect your privacy. But when one of our most recognizable talents starts engaging in activities that could potentially impact studio operations or public perception, we naturally take notice." The PR director, a slender man with nervous hands, jumped in. "What Ms. Wilson is trying to say is that we're concerned about possible misunderstandings. If you have concerns about our facility operations, there are proper channels." "I'm well aware of the proper channels," David interrupted. "I tried those 2 weeks ago when I met with HR and facilities management. Nothing happened. These things take time," Charlotte said soothingly. Budgets need to be reviewed, proposals drafted. Meanwhile, people who have given decades of service to this studio are working themselves sick just to make rent, David countered, his calm exterior beginning to crack. Robert's been here for 23 years and he can't even afford to take a day off when he's ill. Charlotte's expression hardened slightly. I understand your concern for our staff is well-intentioned, but there are complex factors at play here that you may not fully appreciate. Then help me understand them, David challenged. Explain to me why a studio that just announced record profits can't pay its cleaning staff a living wage. The PR director shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Perhaps we should focus on constructive solutions rather than, that's exactly what I've been trying to do, David said firmly. But I can't help but feel like I'm hitting a wall of corporate speak and delay tactics. Charlotte studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. What exactly is it that you want, David? I want the studio to do right by its workers. All of them, not just the ones whose names appear on movie posters. And if we don't meet your expectations, what then? Her voice had taken on a slight edge. Are you planning to go public with complaints? Take your concerns to the press? Because I should remind you of certain clauses in your contract regarding public statements about the studio. The threat was subtle but clear. David felt a flash of anger but kept his voice steady. I'm not looking to damage the studio, Charlotte. I'm looking to make it better. For everyone. Noble sentiments, she replied with a thin smile. But in this industry, nobility doesn't always align with reality. The meeting ended shortly after, with vague assurances that his concerns would be taken under advisement. As David walked back to his trailer, he felt a mix of frustration and resolve. The meeting had confirmed what he suspected. Meaningful change wouldn't come easily or without resistance. In his trailer, he found a message from his agent about an urgent call. When he dialed back, his agent sounded unusually tense. What's going on? David asked. I just got a call from the studio. They're suggesting we consider your involvement in the Martinez project. The Martinez project was a prestigious film David had been attached to for months, scheduled to begin production immediately after his current project wrapped. They're threatening my next job, David asked, disbelief evident in his voice. Not explicitly, his agent hedged, just suggesting that scheduling might become complicated unless certain distractions are resolved. Want to tell me what's happening over there? David explained the situation, from finding Robert asleep to his meeting with Charlotte that morning. His agent sighed heavily. Look, I admire what you're trying to do, really, but this is a small town, professionally speaking. Word gets around. If you get labeled as difficult or a troublemaker, so I should just look the other way? David challenged. Pretend I don't see what's happening. I'm just saying there might be more effective approaches than going to war with one of the biggest studios in town. Especially with your career on the upswing. After hanging up, David paced his trailer, anger and uncertainty warring within him. The studio was playing hardball, making it clear there could be professional consequences if he persisted. Part of him wanted to back down, to protect the career he'd worked so hard to build. But then he thought of Robert's tired eyes and Patricia's scarred arm. Of Grace barely seeing her children because she was working 2 jobs. Of Louis, who had given most of his life to a company that viewed him as disposable. He picked up his phone and made a call, not to his agent or the studio executives, but to Alex, the investigative journalist. I need to move forward with what we discussed, David said when Alex answered, but I need to be smart about it. Are you sure? Alex asked. Once we start this, there's no going back. I'm sure. Over the next week, David continued filming as normal, giving no indication of his plans. He was professional on set, cordial with executives who passed through and careful about when and how he communicated with Robert and the others. But behind the scenes, things were happening. Alex was quietly gathering information, verifying the accounts David had collected, and reaching out to other maintenance workers at different studios to establish patterns. David had connected Alex with an employment lawyer who specialized in labor issues, and together they were building a case. On Friday afternoon, as David was leaving the studio, he spotted Robert mopping the main lobby floor. Their eyes met briefly and David gave a subtle nod. Robert returned the gesture with the barest hint of a smile before returning to his work. That evening, David met with Robert, Louis, Grace, Patricia, and Hector at a small community center miles from the studio. They were joined by Alex, the lawyer, and representatives from a labor organizing group. "Before we go any further," David said to the gathered workers, "I need you all to understand the potential risks. The studio already knows something's happening and they've made it clear they don't like it. There could be pushback, maybe even attempts to identify and pressure those involved." "We know the risks," Louis said, his weathered face set with determination. "We've been talking among ourselves all week. More people want to join, but they're watching to see if we're serious." Grace nodded. "My kids deserve better than what I can give them now. If there's a chance to change things, I have to take it." The meeting lasted for hours as they mapped out a strategy. The lawyer explained the legal protections for organizing activities and what to expect if the studio retaliated. The labor organizer outlined how to effectively communicate their demands and build solidarity among workers who weren't yet involved. David's role would be complex. As a highly visible figure, he could bring attention to their cause, but his involvement also had to be carefully managed to prevent the studio from dismissing this as a celebrity's vanity project rather than a legitimate labor issue. "The key," Alex explained, "is to make sure the workers' voices stay at the center of this. David can open doors and get media attention, but this has to be your movement, not his." As the meeting was wrapping up, Robert pulled David aside. "I never thought I'd see anything like this," the janitor said quietly. "People are talking, David. Not just the night crew, but daytime maintenance, cafeteria staff, even some of the lower-level production assistants. They're watching, waiting to see if this is real." "It's real," David assured him, "but what happens next depends on all of you as much as it does on me." Robert hesitated, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on him. "Why are you doing this, really? You're risking a lot and it's not even your fight." David considered the question carefully. "When I was starting out, before I got my break, I worked as a dishwasher at a restaurant. 60 hours a week sometimes for barely enough to cover rent in a place with 4 roommates. The owner was a wealthy guy who'd stop by in his luxury car, complain about something, and leave. Never learned any of our names." He paused, the memory still sharp after all these years. "I promised myself that if I ever made it, I wouldn't be that guy. I wouldn't be the one who walks past people without seeing them. And yet somehow for years that's exactly what I've been doing here, walking past you, past all of you, without really seeing." Robert nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. As David drove home that night, his phone rang. It was Charlotte Wilson. "I thought we should talk again," she said without preamble. "Perhaps over dinner tomorrow? Somewhere private, just the two of us." David recognized the offer for what it was, an attempt to handle him away from witnesses, to either charm or threaten him into compliance. "I appreciate the invitation, Charlotte, but I think any discussions about studio policies should happen with all relevant parties present." There was a long pause before she responded, her voice noticeably cooler. "I'm trying to give you an opportunity to resolve this situation amicably, David, for everyone's benefit." "I understand. And I'm still hoping we can find a solution that works for everyone, but that solution needs to include fair treatment for all studio employees." After hanging up, David felt a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. Lines had been drawn. In the morning, the real work would begin and there would be no turning back. The next week brought changes that rippled through the studio like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Word spread quietly among the maintenance and support staff. Hushed conversations in break rooms, meaningful glances exchanged in hallways, small groups gathering in the parking lot after shifts. Something was happening and everyone could feel it. Robert had emerged as an unexpected leader. After 23 years of keeping his head down and doing his job without complaint, he found his voice. His quiet dignity and unquestionable work ethic made him someone others trusted and respected. When he spoke about better working conditions, people listened. Meanwhile, David continued filming, professional as ever on set. But the atmosphere around him had shifted. Some crew members seemed to avoid eye contact, while others went out of their way to express subtle support, a nod, a thumbs up when no one was looking. A whispered, "We're with you," while adjusting his microphone. The studio executives were watching too. Charlotte Wilson had begun appearing on set more frequently, ostensibly to check on production progress, but David noticed how her gaze followed him, assessing, calculating. On Wednesday morning, David received a call from Alex. "We're ready to move forward," the journalist said. I've verified enough of the accounts to run the story. The question is timing. What are our options? David asked, stepping away from his trailer to ensure privacy. We could go with what we have now. Your testimony, the accounts from Robert and the others, documentation of wage stagnation despite studio profits. It would make a splash, but David sensed the hesitation in Alex's voice. But if we wait another week, I might be able to connect with sources at 2 other major studios. From what I'm hearing, this isn't just a problem at your studio, it's industry-wide. That would make it a much bigger story, harder to dismiss as an isolated issue. David weighed the options. A bigger story meant more pressure for change, but waiting also gave the studio more time to identify and potentially intimidate the workers involved. Let me talk to Robert and the others, he decided. It should be their call as much as ours. That evening, David met Robert and Louis in a quiet corner of a public library. He explained the situation and asked their opinion on timing. Louis spoke first. Things are happening already. People are talking, organizing. Just yesterday, I heard the daytime cleaning crew is planning to ask for a meeting with management about overtime pay. Is that good or bad for us? David asked. It could go either way, Robert said thoughtfully. If they get shut down hard, it might scare people. But if they see others speaking up, there's something else, Louis added, lowering his voice further. Pete from security overheard Charlotte talking to someone on the phone about bringing in temporary workers just in case. They're preparing for trouble. David nodded, absorbing this information. So they're expecting some kind of action from you all. They know something's brewing, Robert confirmed. The question is, do we move now before they're fully prepared or wait and build more support? After discussion, they decided to split the difference. Alex would continue gathering information from other studios, but they would set a firm deadline of 1 week, regardless of whether those additional sources came through. As David was leaving the library, his phone rang. It was his agent again, voice tight with tension. The studio called. They're putting the Martinez project on hold indefinitely. David's stomach dropped. The Martinez project wasn't just any film. It was a passion project he'd been developing for years, a role he deeply believed in. Did they give a reason? He asked, already knowing the answer. Budget concerns, his agent said sarcastically. We both know what this is. They're sending you a message. And David, it gets worse. I've been making calls all day and word is spreading. 2 other projects that were interested in you have suddenly gone quiet. David leaned against his car, letting the implications sink in. The studio was flexing its considerable muscle, showing him exactly what it could do to his career if he continued down this path. What do you want me to do? His agent asked after a long silence. David thought of Robert's daughters working toward better futures, of Grace's children rarely seeing their mother because she had to work 2 jobs, of his own words to Robert about not being the person who walks past others without seeing them. Keep trying to save the Martinez project, he said finally. But I'm not backing down, his agent sighed. I figured you'd say that, just be careful, okay? These people play hardball. The next morning, David arrived on set to find a strange tension in the air. Crew members seemed distracted, exchanging worried glances. When he reached his trailer, he found Robert waiting nearby, face drawn with concern. What's wrong? David asked. They fired Grace this morning, Robert said, voice barely above a whisper. Claimed she was taking supplies home. Everyone knows it's a lie. Grace wouldn't take so much as a paper towel. Where is she now? At home, worried sick about her rent. She's a single mom, David. She can't go without income even for a week. David felt a surge of anger. This is retaliation, plain and simple. Alex said that's illegal. Maybe so, but proving it takes time and money. Grace needs to feed her kids tonight. David nodded grimly. Tell her not to worry about money right now. I'll cover her expenses until we get this sorted out. Robert looked relieved, but still troubled. It's not just Grace, they're sending a message to everyone else. People are scared now, wondering who'll be next. Throughout the day, David could feel the fear spreading through the set. Even some of the regular crew, camera operators, lighting technicians, makeup artists, seemed on edge, as if the situation with the maintenance staff had reminded them of their own job insecurity. During the lunch break, he called Alex and explained what had happened. They're escalating, Alex said grimly, trying to crush this before it gains momentum. Classic union-busting tactics, so what do? We escalate too. I've got enough to go with the story now. Not as comprehensive as I'd like, but Grace's firing gives us a timely news hook. When? David asked. I can have it ready by tomorrow morning. But David, once this goes public, there's no middle ground anymore. The studio will see you as an enemy. I understand, David said, realizing he had crossed a point of no return. That evening, instead of going home after filming, David did something unexpected. He went to the studio's executive offices, which were mostly empty at that hour, and knocked on Charlotte Wilson's door. She looked up from her computer, surprise quickly masked by a cool professional smile. David, this is unexpected. What can I do for you? You fired Grace Thompson today, he said without preamble. A single mother with 3 kids on completely fabricated grounds. Charlotte's smile didn't waver. Personnel matters are confidential, as I'm sure you understand. But if you're referring to the custodial employee terminated for theft, I assure you the decision was based on documented violations. Reinstate her, David said simply, with back pay and an apology. Charlotte leaned back in her chair. That's quite a demand from someone who has no authority over hiring decisions. It's not a demand. It's an opportunity, maybe the last one, to start fixing the situation before it blows up in all our faces. Is that a threat? Charlotte's voice had hardened. It's a reality. By this time tomorrow, everyone's going to know how this studio treats its most vulnerable workers. The only question is whether your response makes things better or worse. Charlotte studied him for a long moment. You know, I've always admired your acting, David. You have a way of making even the most scripted lines sound authentic. But this performance, the righteous champion of the working class, it doesn't quite ring true coming from someone with a $20 million salary and a beachfront mansion. This isn't about me, David said evenly, isn't it? The famous actor swooping in to save the day, generating glowing press coverage just in time for awards season, seems rather convenient. David felt a flash of anger but kept his voice steady. You're right about one thing. This isn't my natural role. I've walked past these people for years without really seeing them. That's on me and I can't change that. But I can change what I do now. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Reinstate Grace, it's a small gesture that would mean everything to her family. Charlotte's expression remained impassive. I'll take your concerns under advisement. That night, as David tried to sleep, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was a photo of him meeting with Robert and Lewis at the library, clearly taken without their knowledge. There was no message, just the image, a reminder that he was being watched. Instead of intimidating him, the photo strengthened his resolve. Tomorrow the story would break. The studio's treatment of its workers would be exposed to public scrutiny. There would be no going back for any of them. Not for David, not for Robert and his colleagues, and certainly not for the studio executives who had chosen intimidation over reform. As he finally drifted off to sleep, David wondered what the next day would bring. He had risked his career, made powerful enemies, and potentially closed doors throughout the industry. Yet despite the uncertainty ahead, he felt more at peace than he had in years. David woke to his phone buzzing incessantly. It was just past 6 a.m. and his screen was filled with notifications, missed calls from his agent, texts from friends, news alerts. Alex's story had broken, and it was spreading fast. He opened the article with a mix of anticipation and dread. The headline read, Hollywood's Invisible Workforce. Famous actor exposes mistreatment of studio support staff. Alex had done a masterful job. The article led with Grace's unjust firing, but quickly expanded into a comprehensive examination of labor practices across major studios. It included anonymous testimonies from dozens of workers, documentation of wage disparities, and examples of safety violations. David's name was prominently featured, his quotes thoughtful and measured, framing this not as one celebrity's crusade, but as a fundamental issue of dignity and fairness. By the time David arrived at the studio, the story had been picked up by major news outlets. Camera crews had gathered outside the main gate, and security was turning away reporters. David drove past them with his head down, bracing himself for whatever awaited him on set. The first person he saw was Charlotte Wilson, standing outside his trailer with 2 men he recognized as members of the studio's legal team. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. "A word, please," she said, her voice ice cold. Inside his trailer, Charlotte didn't bother with pleasantries. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The damage to the studio's reputation? The potential financial impact?" David met her gaze steadily. I do. I also understand the damage that's been done to hundreds of people who have given years of service to this studio and been treated as disposable. One of the lawyers stepped forward. Mr. Collins, the studio is prepared to take legal action regarding multiple violations of your contract, including confidentiality clauses and public disparagement. Go ahead, David interrupted. I consulted with attorneys before speaking to the press. Everything I said is protected speech about workplace conditions. But by all means, sue me. That will definitely help with the PR disaster you're facing. Charlotte dismissed the lawyers with a wave of her hand. When they were alone, her demeanor shifted subtly. This isn't how things are done in this town, David. There are channels, protocols. Which weren't working, David replied. I tried the official channels first, remember? Charlotte sighed, suddenly looking tired. The board is meeting in an hour. They're demanding answers, solutions. What exactly do you want? It's not about what I want. It's about what's right for the people who keep this place running. Fine, she said tersely. Then what do they want? Specifically, David handed her a folder he had prepared. Here's a start. Living wages indexed to inflation. Proper benefits including actual sick leave. Safety protocols with real enforcement. A clear path to advancement for long-term employees. An immediate reinstatement for Grace Thompson. Charlotte took the folder without opening it. I'll bring this to the board. But I should warn you, there are those who want to make an example of you. Who think the smartest move is to fire you from this production and battle this out in court and the media. They're welcome to try, David said calmly. But I think we both know that would just pour gasoline on the fire. As Charlotte left, David checked his phone again. The story had exploded online. Hollywood Invisible Workers was trending. Other actors and directors were beginning to voice support, some sharing their own observations of mistreatment of support staff. Even more significantly, workers at other studios were coming forward with similar stories. What had started as one man, finding a sleeping janitor, had somehow catalyzed an industry-wide reckoning. Filming was canceled for the day as the studio scrambled to respond to the crisis. David used the time to check in with Robert and the others. They arranged to meet at Grace's small apartment, where she was still reeling from her sudden termination in the unexpected spotlight. When David arrived, he found not just Robert, Louis, Patricia, and Hector, but nearly a dozen other studio workers crammed into Grace's living room. They greeted him with a mix of gratitude and nervousness, still uncertain about what the future held. My phone hasn't stopped ringing, Grace said, her eyes wide. Reporters, lawyers, even people from other studios with similar stories. It's overwhelming. You don't have to talk to anyone you don't want to, David assured her. And don't worry about money, my offer still stands to cover your expenses until this is resolved. Robert, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Something's happening at the studio. Pete from security called a few minutes ago. The board meeting ended, and now there's some kind of emergency session with all department heads. That could be good or bad, David acknowledged. They're scared, Louis said with a hint of satisfaction in his weathered voice. For the first time, they're actually scared of what we might do. Throughout the day, support continued to pour in from unexpected places. Other celebrities began sharing the story on social media. Labor organizers from various industries reached out offering assistance. Most surprisingly, several studio executives from competing companies made discreet overtures, suggesting they were open to discussing improvements in their own labor practices to avoid similar exposure. By evening, the studio released its first official statement, a carefully worded acknowledgement of concerns raised about workplace conditions and a commitment to review all relevant policies. It was corporate speak at its finest, saying little while promising nothing concrete. But an hour later, David received a call from Charlotte. Her voice was clipped, businesslike. Grace Thompson will be reinstated tomorrow with full back pay. The official story is that there was a miscommunication regarding inventory procedures. That's good, David said cautiously. And the other issues? The board has authorized me to form a working group to evaluate the proposals in your document. They want representation from management, HR, legal, and she paused as if the words were difficult to say, and from the maintenance and support staff themselves. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a beginning. A crack in a system that had seemed impenetrable just days earlier. I'll tell the others, David said, When does this working group start? Monday, and David, the Martinez project is back on the schedule, pending final budget approval. He recognized the olive branch for what it was. Thank you, Charlotte. Don't thank me, she replied briskly. Just finish this current film on time and without further drama, if possible. The next morning, David arrived early at the studio again, this time hoping to catch Robert at the end of his shift. He found him in the break room, looking tired but somehow lighter than he had in weeks. Grace got the call, Robert said by way of greeting. She'll be back tomorrow. I heard, David replied with a smile. Charlotte told me about the working group too. Robert nodded, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Louis, Patricia, and I have been chosen to represent the maintenance staff. Management's actually asking for our input. Never thought I'd see the day. It's just the beginning, David cautioned. There will be pushback, delays, attempts to water everything down. We know, Robert said with quiet determination. But we're not alone anymore. That's what's different now. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, two men from vastly different worlds who had somehow found common ground. My daughter Tina called last night, Robert said suddenly. She saw the news. Said she was proud of her old man for finally speaking up. His voice caught slightly. That meant something, you know? David nodded, understanding completely. As they parted ways, Robert heading home after his shift and David to the set. The janitor paused. You know, when you found me sleeping that day, I was sure I was going to get fired. Never imagined it would lead to all this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing everything that had happened. Funny how life works sometimes. Funny indeed, David agreed. 6 months later, the changes at the studio had exceeded even the most optimistic expectations. The working group had evolved into a permanent labor management committee with real authority. Wages for support staff had increased by an average of 28%, with the largest gains going to the longest-serving employees. New safety protocols were in place, and a professional development program offered paths to advancement for workers who had previously been stuck in dead-end positions. Most surprisingly, the studio had discovered that treating workers with dignity and fair compensation had tangible benefits: lower turnover, reduced absenteeism, and improved morale across all departments. Other studios had begun implementing similar changes, partly from genuine concern and partly from fear of being the next target of media scrutiny. What had started as one studio's problem had catalyzed an industry-wide reevaluation. The Martinez project was now in pre-production, with filming scheduled to begin in a month. David's career had weathered the storm. Some doors had closed, but others had opened, including offers for projects with directors who admired his willingness to take a stand. On his last day of filming, David found a small package in his trailer. Inside was a framed photo of Robert with both his daughters, Lisa in her teacher's clothes and Tina in nursing scrubs, all of them smiling proudly. A note was attached. Thought you might want to see what you helped make possible. Lisa just bought her first home. Tina graduates next month, and I'm finally working just one job with actual days off to spend with them. Some debts can never be repaid, but they can be acknowledged. Thank you for seeing us when no one else did. Robert David carefully placed the frame in his bag. As he left the studio that evening, he passed a woman mopping the floor near the exit. She looked up and gave him a small nod of recognition. Not as a famous actor, but as a fellow human being worthy of acknowledgement. He nodded back, knowing that the simple gesture, really seeing another person, was where all meaningful change begins.